Yesterday there was a discussion of internet privacy and the question of privacy is different from electronic surveillance, related but different. One of the challenges is the whole concept of a right to privacy is a creation of the Supreme Court, in a sense, right? Saying that people have a right to privacy. But what does that really mean? In all the discussion of arguments for that topic yesterday, what The Economist says, looking at privacy, is that, sort of who owns it? In other words, the question is, do you have a right to your reputation? Right? Your reputation is your personal. It's something you have. But do you have a right to own that? The language just says, well, yeah, it's your reputation. But what if somebody's saying negative things about you? What if somebody's saying you're terrible? What if somebody posts online, this guy's an idiot, he's terrible? Well, then you could restrict that, but only through restricting freedom of speech. So you have this whole area of privacy to talk about. When you go buy stuff, is that information yours? If you went to Target and buy a bunch of stuff, who owns that information about what you purchased? Yeah. Privacy is in a lot of cases, and I don't know the case law for it. By the way, I recommend the Vaucliffe Conspiracy website, which is now part of the Washington Post. Eugene Vaucliffe is a law professor, I think, at UCLA. I never can remember the name. It's some complicated Russian name. But I mention it because it's the lead blog post for conservative and libertarian legal scholars. So there's 15 or 20 of them who post there. Some are more conservative, some are more libertarian. Randy Barnett posts there. But you'll find a lot of posts about privacy, and the kind of posts you'll find are those by law professors who write studies on this, who write articles, who testify, are before the Supreme Court sometimes. And so that's the go-to source I would recommend. Of course, there's many other law blogs, but you'll find through them who they recommend. Now, again, that's conservatives and libertarians. There's other people that look at privacy different ways. V-O-L-K-O-H, something R-H or L something H, Eugene Vaucliffe. But usually there's enough people that misspell it that Google will find the right one for you. And it moved to the Washington Post recently. But getting back to the legal issue here, if you go to Target and buy a bunch of stuff, that information is both Target's and yours. They sold the stuff to you, they know who you are. Yeah.
I think that the problem with the entire issue with resolution is that privacy has to be defined differently for every case. I mean, like that happens in debate, but the fact is it cannot be defined. For instance, with the Target, with the technology we have, if you go to Target, information is between two people. So whether one person disagrees or agrees that that information should be kept private, it already belongs to two parties.
Right.
So you have to define privacy or individual privacy as something completely different in every scenario. And that's what makes it different.
Yeah, it's complicated. Now the resolution, though, we're talking about the STOA policy, and it's just electronic surveillance. So there's no privacy in it, or is there?
It just says electronic surveillance law.
Electronic surveillance law. So the law, and it's federal electronic surveillance law. So it could be the federal government monitoring or changing private electronic surveillance, or it could be, trying to reduce the government. So there's a whole range. But I just wanted to spend a minute talking about the nature of privacy and just the very questions you asked, because people simply do not have a right to privacy. And so that you can say it's a civil right, but even the whole concept of civil rights, they're simply rights. The Supreme Court and progressive writers tried to made up civil rights as a way to separate them from like civil liberties and economic liberties. The Supreme Court decided we're not going to protect people's economic liberties, right to contract, property rights, those things. We're not going to give those the protections that seem to be called for in the Bill of Rights, but we are going to protect freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the civil liberties, civil rights that are on that side. So I think it's a mistake to separate them out. I'm an economist, so I tend to focus on economic things. But the deal with, let's say, a grocery store, when you use the grocery store card that gives you a discount on a bunch of stuff, why do they do that? Just because they're nice people? No, because they're collecting information. The information is so valuable, they're willing to pay you for it. So that information tells them that you bought 18 things at once, and they have giant databases trying to figure out a correlation there. So they're giving you discounts, but they're also collecting information. If you don't want to give them that information, you can use cash, in which case they can't connect it to you, or you could use their deal, and maybe that doesn't give you that. But the point is, the credit card people who managing these, they're learning from what you buy. The classic story, yeah, go ahead.
How does having or not having this type of surveillance in place on the federal government level impact the economy? Like, in what way? I mean, I know there's, like, last year with the marine, there's a lot of things where fishing impacted the economy a lot, but how does this particularly impact our economic situation?
Well, there's a lot of impact. So who does the most electronic surveillance? Well, it's Google. Probably Google does twice as much as everyone else combined. But what are they surveilling, or what are they monitoring? They're monitoring emails. They're monitoring every post you make, everything you do. And why are they doing that? Well, they're a company that makes money off information, and they're trying to figure out, what products to sell you, what to advertise, and so forth. And they personally are not monitoring it. Their algorithms monitor it. So the privacy advocates say, well, I'll never use Google because they're reading all my email. But others say, well, I use it because it's convenient and they don't care. But so laws that say you can't do that, like the European Union passes a law for this erasing your past Google searches. The European Union or the government can pass all sorts of regulations that limit electronic monitoring. But the argument that Google makes is that they can gather a lot of information this way. This is valuable to them. In fact, Google's far better in catching terrorists than the government is. If you wanted to catch terrorists, contract out with Google. They have much more sophisticated people for gathering information, as do other private security companies. Which reminds me, one of the private security companies got this huge contract to do all this stuff, and it turns out it was a video game maker in Las Vegas. And he had this like 150 employees doing video game programming, and he basically told the government he had a top secret electronic thing to catch terrorists. And so these government officials came and they saw his staff of people all working on all this stuff, and he got like a $50 million contract to do stuff. They caught him eventually, but anyway, so yeah.
Would I be completely incorrect in saying that we've come so far with electronic surveillance that if we removed everything that people consider a violation to their privacy, such as people who work for Google, that the economy would collapse in a certain sense?
I wouldn't say collapse, but they use this information that's knowledgeable, that's information they use to sell products to people. Now, if you believe that corporations are manipulating us, making us buy things we don't really want, then you'd want less of that. But if you believe that corporations, that we really don't know what we want sometimes, and finding out about it, companies try to find stuff that excites us.
Right, because they make money off of our information. So
Yeah.
if we're completely private, if we have all rights to privacy, technically, then wouldn't that cause job loss?
Well, I guess I'd say if you wanted to have a policy where people could opt out if they wanted to, people who were so paranoid about privacy that they want to opt out, there ought to be ways for them to do that, maybe you would say.
Well, the right to be forgotten.
Yeah. Now you could say you could purchase it or you could use tools. Like in the Snowden book, Greenwald says Snowden contacted him and said, "I'd like to talk to you, but your email isn't private. I can't send you information until you get this. You should install PGP, Pretty Good Privacy, which is an encryption program that encrypts all your email." And he tells Greenwald this, and Greenwald says, "Yeah, I don't know a lot about computers. I'd like to, but I'm busy." So then weeks go by, like weeks and weeks go by. Snowden keeps writing to him saying, "Well, can I help you?" Snowden even created a video on how to install Pretty Good Privacy because he was unwilling to send his information to Greenwald until he knew Greenwald had protected email. He never did it, and so it came through someone else. But the point is, you can have completely private email by installing these. And the best book on this, by the way, is Crypto, CRYPTO, and it's by, it's a couple years old now, so maybe there's a new edition. The author is Stephen, the guy who writes on Apple computer stuff a lot. I can't think of it. I've got the book. I've read part of it. It's fascinating. But it's a whole history of crypto, who invented the technology, how it works. But that would give you a background on the whole, because the federal government is very, very concerned that terrorists now can buy crypto tools that'll encrypt their video conferences and email, and supposedly no federal government computer can crack this stuff.